Your neighbor waters their lawn every evening at 6. They see your fence, your shed, your gate. They have never once looked twice at any of it. Neither has your HOA. Neither has the city inspector who drove past your street last month for a permit dispute 2 doors down. And by September, what's sitting behind that fence could be putting $5,000 a month into an account nobody's asking questions about. Here's the part that matters more than the number. None of it exists yet. Not the setup, not the first sale, not the first customer. It starts in the next 4 weeks, or it doesn't start this year at all. That's not a marketing line. It's a calendar problem. 3 of the 5 systems in this video have a hard planting, breeding, or setup window that closes before August ends. Miss it, and you're not looking at a slower ramp-up. You're looking at waiting until next spring. No permits, no zoning violations, no livestock classification issues. Every system in this video was chosen against 2 filters. It has to generate real, verifiable income from an actual operator working in an actual state, and it has to be physically invisible from the street-facing side of a standard suburban lot. If it failed either test, it didn't make the list. 5 systems made it. Let's get into it. Before we go further, subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel breaks down one complete backyard income system every week, start to finish, with real numbers. Miss one and you miss the piece that makes the next one make sense. Because here's what nobody tells you up front. These systems aren't 5 separate side hustles. They're built to feed each other. What one produces as waste becomes another one's raw material. By the time we reach System 5, your input costs are dropping while your output is climbing. And that's not luck. That's the order I'm about to give you. Here's why the timing actually matters. And it's not hype. It's biology and market cycles. Most people who think about backyard income assume it's a spring decision. Plant in spring, harvest in fall, that's the rhythm they know. But the systems that actually produce real monthly income don't run on the garden calendar. They run on breeding cycles, corm dormancy periods, and fall market demand windows. And almost all of those have their real point of no return sitting in the back half of summer, not the front. Take egg-laying birds. A bird that starts laying in October needs to be fully grown and settled into a coop by the time the days start shortening in September, because daylight is the trigger that starts and stabilizes laying cycles. Start in October and you're not behind by a month. You're behind by an entire production season, because you'll be feeding a non-laying bird through the coldest, most expensive months of the year. Take a high-value bulb crop that has to go into the ground while the soil is still warm enough to trigger root development, but early enough that the plant has time to establish before the first hard frost. Miss that 4 to 6 week window, and the corms sit in a bag in your garage until next year, doing nothing. Take a fungus that needs a specific temperature range to colonize a substrate before it can be moved outside to fruit in the cooler weather that triggers fruiting in the first place. Start too late, and you're trying to inoculate in cold weather, which is the single most common reason first-time growers get contamination instead of a harvest. This is why before August isn't a countdown gimmick. It's the last point where you can start any of these 5 systems and still see real income before the calendar year is out. After that, you're not starting a business, you're starting a waiting room. Let's build it, starting with the fastest one to cash flow. System 1. Japanese quail, the 6-week bird income range, $500 to $900 per month. Startup cost, $150 to $250. Time to first income, 6 to 8 weeks. Coturnix quail are not chickens, and that distinction is the entire reason this system works. Most municipal backyard bird ordinances are written around chickens and roosters specifically. Crowing, size, and waste volume are the concerns city councils actually legislate against. Quail are small enough, quiet enough, and classified differently enough in most jurisdictions that a covered hutch tucked against a garage wall or under a patio overhang draws zero attention and, in the overwhelming majority of suburban zoning codes, requires no permit at all. Always check your specific local ordinance before you build anything, but the pattern holds across most standard residential zoning. Here's the mechanics. A hen reaches laying maturity at 6 to 8 weeks. faster than almost any other backyard animal you could raise, and a healthy hen lays close to 1 egg a day. A setup of 40 hens in a stacked, covered hutch system takes up roughly the footprint of 2 standard patio doors laid end to end. That's 30-plus eggs a day at scale. The income isn't just table eggs, and this is the part most people starting out leave on the table. Quail eggs sell in 3 separate markets simultaneously. Table eggs go to specialty grocers and farmers markets at a premium. Quail eggs are treated as a gourmet product, not a commodity, and they price accordingly. Fertile hatching eggs sell to other backyard hobbyists getting started at a significantly higher price point than table eggs because you're selling genetics, not just protein. And once your flock is established, surplus roosters and retired hens move through the same local buyer networks as meat birds at a price that covers your feed costs on its own. A grower running this exact setup outside Boise, Idaho, keeps 48 hens in a 3-tier hutch built against the north wall of a detached garage. No direct sunlight, no visibility from the street, no noise complaint in 2 years of operation. She sells table eggs to 2 specialty grocers and hatching eggs through a regional online marketplace. Combined monthly gross sits between $650 and $850 depending on season, against a monthly feed cost under $70. Biggest mistake, starting with adult breeding stock instead of day-old chicks from a reputable hatchery. Adult quail purchased secondhand carry a meaningfully higher risk of respiratory illness that can wipe out an entire flock in days, and there's no way to verify age or laying history from a stranger's listing. Day-old chicks cost less per bird, let you control biosecurity from day 1, and reach laying age in under 2 months anyway. There's no real time saved by buying older birds, only added risk. Here's the bridge to System 2. Quail manure is nitrogen-rich and, unlike chicken manure, doesn't need to be composted for months before it's safe to use. It's mild enough to go nearly straight onto beds with only light composting. That waste stream becomes the fertility input for what we're building next. System 2. Saffron corms income range. $400 to $1,200 per month seasonal, concentrated into a 6-week fall harvest startup cost. $300 to $600 for corms. Planting window must go into the ground in late summer. If you take one specific non-negotiable deadline away from this entire video, make it this one. Saffron crocus corms have to be planted in the back half of summer, while soil temperatures are still warm enough to trigger root development, but early enough that the plant has weeks to establish before it flowers in October and November. Miss that window and the corms sit dormant until next year. There is no catch-up in September version of this system. Here's why it's worth building your calendar around. Saffron is, gram for gram, one of the most expensive agricultural products in the world, and the reason has nothing to do with rarity of the plant and everything to do with labor. Each flower produces exactly 3 thread-like stigmas, and those threads have to be hand-harvested at dawn on the day the flower opens, before the bloom degrades the quality of the threads. That labor bottleneck is why saffron commands a price most home growers assume is a typo the first time they look it up. It typically retails well into 4 figures per pound, and a home operation doesn't need anywhere near a pound to generate real income because it sells in gram and half-ounce quantities to chefs and specialty buyers, not by the pound. A grower in the Willamette Valley in Oregon plants roughly 3,000 corms across 4 raised beds tucked along the side yard of her property, completely out of sight from the road, indistinguishable from ornamental planting beds to anyone glancing over a fence. Her 6-week harvest window in October and November produces enough dried threads to sell directly to 11 restaurants within a 20-mile radius, plus direct-to-consumer sales through a small online storefront she updates twice a year. Her season's gross sits between $2,400 and $3,600, concentrated almost entirely into that 6-week window, which, averaged across the full year, is the $400 to $1,200 a month figure quoted above, but in practice it lands as a lump sum fall payday rather than a steady drip. Biggest mistake: harvesting stigmas any time other than the first few hours after a flower opens. Saffron's chemical compounds that give it color, aroma, and flavor begin degrading the moment the flower is exposed to full sun and warmth. Growers who harvest in the afternoon instead of at dawn end up with a visibly and commercially inferior product, and chef buyers, who are your highest value customers, will notice on the first order and not reorder. The fix costs nothing but requires discipline. Harvest is a dawn ritual for 6 weeks, not a weekend chore. The bridge here: the corms themselves multiply underground every year, splitting into new corms without any additional input from you. Year 1 is your only real startup cost year, every year after your bed expands on its own, which is the opposite of how most agricultural systems work. System 3. Fall and winter. Microgreens, the fastest cash cycle in the backyard income range, $500 to $1,000 per month. Startup cost, $150 to $250 harvest cycle, 7 to 14 days per tray. If the first 2 systems are about long lead times paying off big, this one is the opposite, and it's the system that keeps cash moving while you wait on the slower ones. Microgreens are vegetable and herb seedlings harvested at the first true leaf stage, and depending on the variety, that's anywhere from 7 to 14 days after seeding. There is no faster cash cycle in backyard agriculture, full stop. Here's why August specifically matters for this one, even though microgreens technically run year-round. Restaurant and farmers market demand for microgreens spikes hard in September and October, as chefs shift toward hardier fall plating that leans on garnish and texture contrast. And the growers who already have a rotation established when that demand hits are the ones who capture it, not the ones scrambling to set up shop in October once they notice the demand exists. The setup itself is almost aggressively simple: shallow trays, a soilless growing medium, a basic shade structure or a corner of a garage with supplemental lighting, and a 7 to 14 day rotation depending on which greens you're running. Sunflower shoots, pea shoots, radish, and amaranth are the volume movers because they grow fast and sell consistently. But the real margin sits in specialty varieties like purple radish or micro basil that chefs will pay a premium for, specifically because most local growers aren't bothering to grow them. A grower outside Asheville, North Carolina runs a 12-tray rotation in a converted garden shed with a simple grow light setup, staggering plantings every 3 days so she has fresh product ready twice a week without ever having a dead week in her supply. She sells to 3 restaurants and 1 specialty grocer on standing weekly orders, plus overflow through a Saturday farmers market table. Her monthly gross runs $700 to $900 depending on seasonal restaurant demand, against a monthly input cost, seed and growing medium, under $90. Biggest mistake: overwatering. Microgreens are grown in a shallow medium with almost no reservoir capacity, and new growers used to garden-scale watering routines consistently drown their trays, which shows up as mold and damping off within days. The fix is counterintuitive for anyone coming from outdoor gardening: less water, more airflow, and bottom watering trays rather than overhead spraying whenever possible. Bridge to the next system. Microgreen trays produce a steady stream of spent growing medium and unsold trim, both of which are exactly the kind of organic material the next system is built to consume. System 4. Oyster mushroom logs and buckets. The shaded corner. Nobody thinks to use income range. $400 to $800 per month startup cost. $100 to $200. Time to first harvest, 3 to 5 weeks after inoculation, then recurring flushes for months. Every backyard has a corner that gets too much shade to grow vegetables and too little sun to bother mowing well. That corner is exactly what this system is built for. Oyster mushrooms grow on hardwood logs, straw, or even spent coffee grounds packed into 5-gallon buckets, and they thrive in exactly the low-light, high-humidity conditions that make every other backyard use case fail. The reason August matters here is colonization temperature. Oyster mushroom spawn colonizes a substrate fastest in a specific warm but not hot temperature band, and once colonization is complete, the mushrooms need a drop in temperature to trigger fruiting, which is exactly what happens naturally as summer turns to fall. Inoculate in early August, and your fruiting trigger lines up with the first cool nights of September almost perfectly. Inoculate in October instead, after the temperature has already dropped, and you're fighting the substrate's biology instead of working with it, and contamination rates go up substantially. Buckets packed with pasteurized straw or spent coffee grounds, inoculated with oyster mushroom spawn, and kept in a shaded, humid corner will produce multiple flushes of mushrooms over several months from a single inoculation. Logs take longer to establish, often a full season before the first flush, but then produce for several years afterward, which makes them the better long-term asset even though they're slower to start. A grower working out of a shaded side yard corner in Portland, Oregon, runs 18 buckets on a staggered inoculation schedule, so she always has buckets at different stages of the fruiting cycle, which means she never has a total dead week. She sells fresh oyster mushrooms to 2 restaurants on standing orders and moves overflow through a small home delivery list she built from neighborhood social media groups. Her monthly gross runs $500 to $650 with input costs, spawn, and substrate, staying under $50 a month once the initial setup is done. Biggest mistake: skipping pasteurization of the substrate or doing it incompletely. Straw and coffee grounds both carry competing mold and bacteria that will outcompete your mushroom spawn if the substrate isn't properly heat-treated first. New growers who try to skip this step to save time almost universally end up with a bucket of green mold instead of mushrooms, and there's no fix once contamination sets in. The whole bucket has to be discarded and restarted. Bridge to the final system, spent mushroom substrate, once a flush cycle is done, is one of the richest organic soil amendments available, and it's also, not coincidentally, exactly what the final system in this video is built to process. System 5. Vermicomposting, the system that feeds everything else income range. $300 to $600 per month. Startup cost, $80 to $150. Time to first sellable product, 8 to 12 weeks. This is the system that ties the entire backyard together, and it's also the one with the least glamorous name and the most consistently underestimated income. Vermicomposting is raising red wiggler worms in stacked bins to process organic waste into worm castings, a slow-release, chemically balanced organic fertilizer that organic gardeners and specialty nurseries pay a genuine premium for consistently, because demand for high-quality organic soil amendments has been climbing steadily for years, and most regions don't have a reliable local supplier. Here's why this is the last system, not the first, even though it's the simplest one on this list. It's designed to consume the waste stream from every other system you just built. Spent microgreen medium, spent mushroom substrate, and quail bedding are exactly the mixed organic inputs a worm bin thrives on. Build this system last and you're not buying separate inputs for it. You're feeding it with material you were already producing and would otherwise be throwing away, which means your 5th income stream has close to zero marginal input cost, and worm castings aren't the only product. Worm bins also produce worm tea, the liquid runoff, diluted and sold as a liquid fertilizer, and once a bin is established, surplus breeding stock sells to other people starting their own bins, the same way quail hatching eggs sell to other backyard hobbyists getting started. A grower running 4 stacked bins against the shaded back wall of a garage in suburban Ohio feeds her worms almost entirely on spent substrate from her own mushroom and microgreen operations. She sells finished castings by the bag to 2 independent garden centers and moves worm tea and surplus breeding stock through local gardening social media groups. Her monthly gross sits between $350 and $500, with essentially no ongoing input cost because her feedstock is free byproduct from systems 1 through 4. Biggest mistake: overloading the bin with food waste faster than the worms can process it. A new bin, before the worm population has grown to match the feeding rate, will go anaerobic and start to smell if it's fed too aggressively too early. And that smell is the single fastest way to get an HOA complaint, which undermines the entire point of every system on this list. The fix is patience. Start with light, infrequent feeding, and only scale up the feeding rate as the population visibly grows. Nobody who's actually making real money doing this started with all 5 systems running at once. They started with one, usually the quail because it's the fastest to first income, got a little less bad at it every week, and reinvested the first month's profit into building the next system instead of spending it. The barrier was never the land, and it was never the money. Quail, microgreens, and a worm bin together cost less to start than most people spend on a single month of takeout. The barrier was starting before the window closed, and the people who clear that barrier are the ones who pick one system this week instead of waiting for a perfect plan that was never coming. And before it shows up in the comments, no, this doesn't stop working the moment more people find out about it. That's the entire difference between a real local system and a get-rich scheme. A scheme dies the second it gets crowded. These don't because they're local by nature. The restaurant 15 minutes from you needs a saffron grower 15 minutes from you, not a jar that's been sitting in a distribution warehouse for 2 years. There's no national winner in any of these 5 markets. There's just your zip code, the handful of buyers inside it, and whether you're the one who actually built the system before the window closed. Be honest about what you're really building here too. It isn't a yacht. And for almost everyone running these systems, it was never meant to replace a full income. It's the month the main paycheck falls short, and the eggs, the threads, and the mushrooms still sell anyway. It's the quiet, specific knowledge that you can turn dirt, patience, and 45 minutes a day into something that doesn't depend on anyone else's decisions about your job. That's a kind of security most people spent the last decade trading away for convenience. You get to trade a corner of your yard in a few weeks before August ends to start earning some of it back. Start with the quail. It's the cheapest system on this list, the fastest to first income, and its manure is the input that makes every system after it easier and cheaper to run. Once that's established, layer in the microgreens for cash flow, then the mushrooms, then the worm bin to close the loop, and get the saffron corms into the ground this month regardless of what order you tackle everything else in. Because that's the one deadline on this entire list that genuinely does not wait. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me which of these 5 surprised you most. Not which one you're most likely to start, the one that made you stop and actually look up the numbers yourself. I read every comment, and the systems that surprise the most people are the ones I go build the full, deeper breakdown video on next. There's also a free 1-page planting and building calendar in the description with every deadline from this video laid out week by week, so you know exactly what has to happen before August ends. Grab it before you forget. And if any number in this video made you pause, subscribe and turn on the bell, because this is the channel laying out the entire quiet backyard, system by system, with the real math behind every single one. The corner of your yard you've been ignoring might be the most valuable square footage on your block. Now you know what to put there before the window closes.